Hi everyone, today we're going to continue our conversation with factoring. But this time we're going to take that factoring and we're going to apply it to dividing polynomials. All right, so when we're dividing polynomials, our first step is to factor out the numerator. So we're going to always see it written as a fraction. So first we factor out the numerator and then we factor out the denominator. Once we've factored the two parts, we then eliminate common factors. Right? They're going to divide together to make one. All right, so here we go. We're going to take this trinomial at the top and divide it by the monomial at the bottom. So let's start with factoring out this trinomial. So the first thing I notice when I look at the terms is that they all have a common term. Right? So I can factor out the greatest common factor. So my greatest common factor here is going to be 4b. So I can factor out that 4b, and I'm left with b squared plus 3b plus 2. I divided each of these by 4b. That 4b that we pulled out has nothing to do with this 4b squared at the bottom. Okay? Two completely separate things. I am just looking at this top trinomial right now. All right, so now that I factored this out, we're going to use that box method that we like. All right, so remember when we make our box, all right, here's my box. All right, my first term and my last term. We need to fill those in. So as I worked through this, I'm not going to necessarily go into those exact t-tables. All right, remember the t-table is really kind of your strategy. I'm still going to list out all those factor pairs and everything, but at this point, hopefully you've done your practice and you're ready to go with that. All right, so to fill in these two, remember we have to multiply our a times our c. So the 1 times the 2. All right, is going to give me 2. So I need factor pairs. I look at my signs. It's a positive 2. That's a positive 3. So both my terms have to be positive. So I list out all my factor pairs of 2. 1 and 2. And that's it. That's the only factor pair. Those are the only two numbers that multiply to make 2. So that means that these two numbers here have to be 1b. Whoops. Is it going to let me write in there? Let's see, 1b, okay, or in this case, I'm just going to put b, and then in this one, 2b. So now that we've got that, let's see if I can make that centered. There we go. All right, so now that I have my box filled out, right, we look for those greatest common factors. So pull out my b here. This one here, I can pull out my 2. Looking up, I can pull out a b, and looking up, I can pull out a 1. All right, so now that I've done that, now I can factor out what my numerator is going to look like. I have this guy here, and then I've got my b plus 1 and my b plus 2. So I factored it out, so I have my 4b, and then b plus 1 and b plus 2. That was my greatest common factor, and then the factors that I was able to pull out of the box. All right, now this was factoring the numerator. Now let's take a look at the denominator, okay, that 4b squared. My 4b squared is a monomial. That means nothing can be done to it. I can't do anything more to it. So I'm going to write my fraction. I got my numerator factored. I can't do anything on the bottom. So now is when we start actually factoring things out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy and I'm actually going to line him up under this, all right? Only because it's going to make things make a little more sense. So when I'm dividing, right, we're going to look at every single piece as separate pieces. So my 4s, the b and the b squared, my b plus 1, and my b plus 2. Each piece, or each little piece, each factor. All right, so my two 4s here, they can cancel out. So because they're exactly the same, okay, they cancel each other out. That's eliminate common factors. All right, so 4 and 4, common factors, I eliminate them. I can cancel them out. All right, well, b and b squared. Okay, so when I go to eliminate these, I have 1b on top, 2 b's on the bottom. So this just means that I can eliminate this one, and then I'm left with a single b on the bottom. I don't have a factor on the bottom that matches this one, and I don't have a factor on the bottom that matches this one. So there's nothing more I can really do. So my final answer, after I've eliminated common factors, is I have left on top the b plus 1 and the b plus 2. And on the bottom, I just have b. So all we're really doing here with the dividing is factor the numerator. If you can, factor the denominator. Eliminate common factors. Whatever's left over is your answer. So now you're going to have a try on your own here, but first let's go ahead and do another example. All right, so let's take a look at this one. They're asking us to divide these two things. So first we're going to start by factoring out the trinomial at the top. I look for greatest common factors. I don't have any. So I need to factor this out. So when I go to make my box, right, my a term, 2x squared, my c term, negative 15. All right, now we got to fill in these two squares. So I'm going to do my a times c. 2 times negative 15 gives me negative 30. Okay, it has to multiply to a negative number, has to add up to a positive number. So when I go to find my factors, my bigger numbers have to be positive. My smaller numbers are going to have to be negative. All right, so I have negative 1 and 30, negative 2 and 15, negative 3 and 10, negative 5 and 6. So I'm looking for the pair that gives me that positive 1. Happens to be this one here, the negative 5 and 6. So now I can put those in. I have negative 5x and 6x. So once I've done that, right, I've made my box. Now let's find our greatest common factors. I factor this top row, and I can pull out an x. I can find the GCF of my bottom row, and it's 3. Find the GCF of the first column, I get my 2x. Find the GCF of my second column, and I get negative 5. All right, so now the factor of my numerator is 2x minus 5 and x minus 3. So now when we go to factor the denominator, x plus 3, it's already factored. There's nothing I can do. There's no GCFs. It's not a trinomial. It's not a quadratic, the x squared. There's nothing I can do. We call that prime. So there's nothing more I can do to that one. So I'm going to bring it down. So now we're at step 2, where we need to eliminate those common factors. So in this case, we look at what's the same. Well, I've got an x plus 3 on top and an x plus 3 on the bottom. They are going to eliminate each other out. So my answer is what's left over, that 2x minus 5. And that's my answer. All right, here's another try on your own. But before that, let's take a look at another example. All right, so here they're asking us to divide. First thing I'm going to do is look for a greatest common factor. When your leading coefficient is negative, your greatest common factor has to be negative. You have to pull that negative out. Even if it's just a negative 1, you have to pull out a negative. So when your leading coefficient is negative, you have to pull out a negative number. All right, so when I look at my numerator, because that's all I'm going to focus on right now, okay, I look at that. I've got a negative 4, a positive 36, and a negative 56. So I know that my greatest common factor is going to be negative 4. I look at my variables, and I also see that they all have at least 2 v's. Okay? This one has 2, this one has 3, this one has 4. So we can say that v squared is also part of that greatest common factor. So I divide everything by negative 4v squared. And now I'm left with v squared minus 9v plus 14. Remember, when we divide by negatives, all my signs are going to change. All right, now we can factor this part here. So we set up our box. I've got my v squared and I've got my positive 14. Now let's go ahead and fill in these two spots here. So I do my a times c and I get 14. All right, so I need two numbers that multiply to a positive number add to a negative. So in order for them to multiply out to make a positive number, both my signs have to be the same. They can both be positive or they can both be negative. In order for them to add up to a negative number, that means they're both going to have to be negative. All right, so now we can go through and find our factor pairs. And this should have been, that should have been a negative 14 and a negative 1. And then we've got negative 7 and negative 2. Now I know I told you when I make my t-tables, I always put the smaller number on the left, the bigger number on the right. That's just how I normally do it. This was made by someone else, so they did it in reverse order. In the end, as long as you have your signs with the right numbers, it doesn't really matter. All right, so these are my only two factor pairs for 14. So both of them will multiply to make a positive 14. Only one of them will add up to a negative 9. So that happens to be this one here. So in this box, I can put in negative 7. And in this box, I can put in my negative 2. All right, now we can go ahead and do our greatest common factors. Oops, I did forget. Let me try that again. I forgot to put the v in there. So negative 7v and negative 2v. All right, now we can do our greatest common factors. So when I look at this first horizontal row, I'm pulling out a v. When I look at my second row, I can pull out that negative 2. When I look at my first column, I can pull out a v. And when I look at my second column, I can pull out a negative 7. All right, so now I've factored the top trinomial. I include that negative 4v squared, and then I have my v minus 7 and my v minus 2. All right, now let's factor out the denominator. So I'm going to bring that over here. I notice that again, my leading coefficient's negative, so I have to factor out a negative number, and I can see that 2 can go into both. And then I also notice with my v to the third and my v squared, I can pull out the v to the second power as well. So I'm going to factor out the negative 2v squared, and I'm left with v minus 7. So now I can bring that down here, and now we can go ahead and start canceling out the common things. All right, so the most obvious ones, v minus 2, or I'm sorry, v minus 7, v minus 7. So those can cancel each other out. I've got v squared and v squared, so they can cancel each other out. My negative 4 and my negative 2 are going to simplify, essentially. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 is going to give me a positive 2. Right, so we want to make sure that we realize that we can simplify those two numbers there. So negative 4 divided by negative 2 gives me a positive 2, and then I'm left with that v minus 2. Oh, I'm not sure why that says plus. That should say minus. All right. And then that is our final answer. Whoops. Another try on your own. But first, let's look at one more example. Sometimes they're not always presented to you as a fraction. They use that word quotient. Quotient means divide. So we're going to do the same thing. This is my numerator. This is my denominator. I'm going to factor out the numerator, factor out the denominator, and then we can cancel them out. Quotient, remember, means to divide. So if it's not presented as a fraction, look for those key words. All right, so y squared minus 4y plus 4. Look for a greatest common factor. I don't have one. So now I can go ahead and factor this with my box. My y squared and my 4. So I'm going to do my a times c, which gives me 4. It needs to multiply to a positive number, add to a negative number. All right, well, that's familiar because we just did that. So in order to multiply to positive, both signs have to be the same. It means they both have to be positive or they both have to be negative. The only way to add up to a negative number is they have to both be negative. So the person who did this put both pairs down, but really the one that we want is this one here, okay? The -2 and the -2. So this is the pair that I need. So now we can go ahead and we can put those into here. So I get my -2y and a -2y. All right, so now that we have those, now let's go ahead and pull out our greatest common factors. So my top row, they both have a y in common. My bottom row, they both have a -2. First column, y. Second column, -2. All right, so now we can take those two factors that we have, put that in my numerator. Okay, let's factor out the denominator. This is one of those special cases. All right, it's a difference of perfect squares. Y squared and 4. So the square root of y squared is y. The square root of 4 is 2. So if we follow that pattern, it's y plus 2 and y minus 2. Right, that's going to come down here to the bottom. And now we can go ahead and cancel out or eliminate those common factors. So these two here are exactly the same, so they can cancel out. While these two are similar, they're not exactly the same. One's negative, one's positive. I cannot simplify them or cancel them out. So my answer just becomes y over 2, or y minus 2 over y plus 2. And then that's my final answer. Okay, so it's a lot of just more practice with your factoring, and then can you cancel things out that are the same? So before class, please make sure you've done your try and your owns, and then when we come back in, we'll have more practice with our factoring and then being able to cancel them out. I will see you next class.